John, are we good on sound for?
Yep. I did sound check.
John, we can hear you.
Thank you.
Quiet bunch. Let's keep it that way. No questions.
Wait a minute. Take a peek here anyway.
You ready? Everybody ready? No. Yes. All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for being here today. We're now over a month into the session, about a quarter of the way towards adjournment, and we had a good start, with almost everyone in the building making it clear housing would be a top priority. After spending historic amounts over the past few years, and still seeing a lack of housing in every county, there seems to be an understanding outside this building, and I believe in it as well, that it's time to focus on the regulatory side of the equation. We need to make it less expensive, faster, and easier to build or renovate the housing we desperately need. That way, the investments we made will go farther, but more importantly, incentivize the private sector, who actually build much more housing than state government, to invest and build more. On January 10th, I stood here with a tripartisan group of lawmakers and stakeholders to outline good, solid proposals that had wide support, and I felt good about the odds of passing something meaningful. But 1 month into the session, not as confident as I was that day. It appears in some committees they're moving in the opposite direction. Instead of prioritizing how to produce more homes, which would address all kinds of issues like workforce, healthcare, property taxes, education, and more, some are looking to add to the regulatory burden and put us further behind. For example, House Energy and Environment is currently moving forward with a bill that, in my opinion, would be an economic disaster. And Senate's Naturals S-213 looks similar, creating new definitions, significantly expanding requirements and shifting responsibility for certain types of land use regulation for Vermont municipalities to A&R that will put Vermonters in jeopardy of violating laws they don't even know exist. As proposed, H667, or 687, I'm sorry, will also dramatically expand Act 250 jurisdiction statewide. While it does include some Act 250 exemptions, they're narrow, stringent, and geographically limited, making nearly the entire state subject to Act 250. As most of us know, we have a housing crisis in all parts of Vermont, not just in our cities. Leaving rural Vermont in our housing strategy is far from strategic, fair, or acceptable. And to be clear, I'm not proposing that we build on our mountaintops, develop forest land, or create sprawl. Our housing package focuses on designated areas within rural communities. To make my point, let me show you a couple of maps. This is the first. This is what currently triggers automatic Act 250 jurisdiction. As you can see, that's the yellow. And here's what would happen under the House proposal. That would be most of Vermont. Act 250 would be automatically extended to the areas indicated in red, orange, and yellow, which would cover over 75% of the state's land area and would be designated critical resource areas. That means if you want to build a single-family home, or maybe even a garden shed, you'll need to go through Act 250, which we know adds costs and time. Under the House proposal, Act 250 jurisdiction would also be triggered if a proposed project was set back more than 500 feet from an existing road, or was part of a subdivision with more than 4 units. Put another way, as currently drafted, H687 would render more than 90% of the state subject to automatic Act 250 jurisdiction. For perspective, currently less than 15% of the Vermont landscape falls under automatic Act 250 jurisdiction. I think most Vermonters would find this new bill totally unacceptable and hamper, not help, solve our housing crisis. As I said at the beginning of the session, the depth of the crisis we face demands bold action. But this bold action isn't what I had in mind and actually moves us in the wrong direction. So I want to be clear. I won't accept a housing bill that fails to meet the moment. Taking one step forward and one step back won't cut it. Taking 2 steps forward and 1 back won't cut it. We must jumpstart housing in all communities, period. That's going to take all the creative approaches in H719, including changes to Act 250, local zoning, appeals, and tax incentives for those who want to invest in communities. Here's the bottom line. We can't water this package down and expect to address our housing shortage. Now, I've been around this building long enough to know how this works. That's why I call it out in my State of the State and budget address. We cannot let a couple special interests and a couple committees block the progress we need to make. And I'm confident the vast majority of Vermonters agree with me. But I also think most legislators of both parties do as well. The folks back home elected them to solve problems, not create them. And just because you sit on a committee dealing with another issue, it doesn't mean you can't make your voice heard on this one. Because the reality is, housing impacts many issues in other committees, from homelessness to health care, to public safety and resiliency, to education and workforce. So let's make progress on housing that we so desperately need to help our communities. And with that, open up to questions.
Governor, when you refer to special interest groups that are pushing for, who are you referring to?
I would say, for instance, right down the end of the street, ENRC. They've been integral in this process and have hampered our progress.
What do you think the motivation is there?
They have their mission. It's part of, they're a group, a nonprofit, that's their mission is to protect the environment as best they possibly can. My mission is to make Vermont more affordable, create more housing, and make Vermont safer. So we have 2 different missions.
Governor, maybe just to clarify here, when we talk about a new statewide Act 250 jurisdiction, I mean, what's specific, like is it Act 250 like a new criteria, or is it just the area in which Act 250 is applied?
Well, it's all incorporated into the bill. It's the whole revamp of Act 250.
Yeah.
Julie might be able to describe it better.
So it is expanding areas where Act 250 jurisdiction applies. So in the map on the right-hand side there, those areas indicated in orange are above 2,500 feet, and that's automatic Act 250 jurisdiction. In H687, it lowers that threshold to 2,000, or that elevation threshold to 2,000 feet. It also creates what are called critical resource areas, that are defined as prime ag soils, slopes in excess of 15%, river corridors, wildlife connecting habitats, among other criteria, and also indicates automatic jurisdiction if you are more than 500 feet off of a road. And so collectively, it results in the red, orange, and yellow areas shown on the left-hand image.
Is there like any room for a grand bargain where you get 99% of the stuff that you want in areas that are suitable for development, or that most people agree are suitable for development, and you give up the 90% of the state where there's probably not much of a chance for a ton of meaningful development anyway.
Well, again, from the very beginning, we've all been talking about the housing crisis. How does this particular bill, how does it help housing? I haven't seen where it's done anything to help housing. So my first litmus test is how do we make housing more affordable, faster, more units in place to work ourselves out of the situation we find ourselves in. And this bill just doesn't do it.
What about the Senate bill?
The one I've seen, or at least it looks like it mirrors the House version.
I'm talking about the Senate economic.
Oh,
Be home.
yeah. H719 has a lot of good provisions in it. I mean, we all agreed with that, and I'm still supportive of that. We'll see what they do with the Act 250 portions of that, but we'll have to see what happens when it gets through committee and goes over to natural resources. But as proposed, we were in, 90% agreement with everything in there. Not everything.
House Ways and Means appears to be landing on a response to some of the property tax issues that you've raised that involves eliminating this 5% buffer and extending town meeting day votes accordingly, however long districts need to go back to the drawing board, put something back together. Your thoughts on what you've seen so far?
As I understand it, there'll be like 3 phases to this. First phase is making sure that they take away the 5% cap, which I think is a move in the right direction, rectifying that. They're talking about extending town meeting day, or I don't know if it's just the vote on school budgets or whether it's town meeting day itself. It's unclear to me, but I think that's fine as well. I think if you might recall when I proposed something similar about 7-8 years ago, it wasn't well received. But I think this is well timed to give people the opportunity, especially those who've crafted their budgets that have exceeded the 5% cap, and they need to go back to the drawing board. So a couple of things as well with that. One, if they do this doesn't fix the problem. We're not going to come up with $250 million worth of savings with this provision. At best, I think we're looking at best, maybe 15 or 20 million of savings to do this. So there's still a long ways to go in terms of the property tax increases we're going to see as a result. The other piece of this is if we extend this vote for whatever period of time, it's going to cause a lot of confusion, understandably. We have to support the municipalities and the school districts in coming up with new ballots and so forth, and then warning this. I think this is a time when we should institute the mail-in ballots, because you can't expect people, especially if it's not a set date, if it's sometime between traditional town meeting day and some other date, for every town to be consistent would be difficult. So I think mail-in ballots is going to be essential.
Fair to say that one reason you'd like to see mail-in ballots is because you think it would compel voter participation among a swath of the electorate that might apply more scrutiny to those budget proposals?
We've seen in the past where it's a limited number, an embarrassing number of people actually vote in their town meeting day and school budgets and so forth. And I think this is a way, I think we've proven that mail-in ballots increases participation. And I think in this instance, people should weigh in.
Do you think that there's a greater chance that more budgets would be voted down if we did mail-in ballots?
Well, it depends what they what they do, the school boards do with their budgets, because they'd be going back, some of them would be going back to the drawing board, reflecting on this situation we find ourselves in, and maybe changing their budgets.
So the legislature has a proposal right now. You say it doesn't go far enough. What counter proposal do you have that you think would more fully address the property tax issue that voters are contending with?
Well, what I just said, though, was I believe what they're doing is 3 phases. I'm supportive of what they're doing in the first phase. We haven't heard much about the second or third phase at this point, but that's going to evolve. So I wouldn't say I'm opposed to what they're doing.
What more would you like to see? I mean, if you're putting this bill together, what do you want in there?
I think we all have to be at the table. I mean, we've had suggestions in the past. I think that they have to reflect on those. They have some of their own, as I said in the State of the State and the budget address. And we have to work together to find a way to reduce the amount of spending for our schools. And it's going to be tough conversations, no doubt.
You've made suggestions in the past. What are your suggestions right now?
Put those back on the table.
So right now.
I've said that. I mean,
So
not right now. I've said with this phase 2 and phase 3, we're at the table. We're ready, willing, and able. And we want to be part of the solution as well. We're not putting all this on the legislature. We're saying we're here too. And we'll be involved in whatever decisions they make if they want us to be. And we'll be hopefully part of the solution.
But you would, nothing further that you would add as it relates to the school budgets that are going to be voted on this year, whether that's March or April?
I think that's difficult at this point in time. Again, their approach right now to eliminate the 5% cap provision and extending the voting on school budgets for a month or whatever period of time it ends up being is the right move.
It seems that the House and the Senate have some reconciliation that they need to do on this, but in some way, shape, or form, there are proposals to extend the hotel-motel program through June. The House has a broader swath of people that they want to extend eligibility for. How are you feeling about that?
I haven't seen the budget as passed out of committee in the Senate at this point in time, so I can't really comment on it. I know we were trying to get the information this morning, and I didn't see anything in writing. Maybe it's out now, but I haven't seen it.
Do you think that the motel program should be extended through June, though, at least for some?
It depends on what it says, the actual verbiage. So we'll see what it says, and then I can comment further after we get a chance to look at it.
Governor, this morning in Senate Judiciary, we heard some testimony from folks at the Columbia University's Justice Lab, showing that the Raise the Age initiative that the legislature passed and that you signed we're seeing a smaller caseload. I think it's maybe how they put the data this morning. Some might say that kind of goes maybe in opposite of or against of what you painted earlier in your budget address, relating to crimes and delinquency among young offenders. What have you seen this data, and what's your read on the situation?
I haven't seen the data. I'm curious as to how far back they went. Looking at, I believe, this was, if you looked at the trajectory back maybe 10 years, it has been dropping in some respects. But a lot of that is probably due to our demographics. I don't know if they factored that in or not, but I'm sure one of the committee members asked that question.
Your administration, and maybe Commissioner Winters can chime in on this if you'd like, but you're proposing to pause Raise the Age again. We heard some concern from lawmakers this morning about that. Why do you see the need to again pause it? I think
because again, I don't think we're ready. I don't think we were ready before. I signed it. I said that, but I don't think we're ready for it. And I think we have to really take a step back and make sure we know what we're doing. We don't want to make the situation any worse than it is right now. Anything you want to add, Commissioner?
Thank you, Governor. I think you hit on the key points. It's that there were some limitations in the data that the Columbia Justice Center were able to look at, the publicly available data. What we are looking at as a department is the overall system and the strains that this would put on the system of care, both from a child protection services standpoint and a juvenile justice standpoint. We have some of the same workers covering all of those cases, and we have some pretty high vacancy rates right now. We are working on the high-end system of care, but until that is in place, the system is going to remain strained and overworked. And as the governor said, we want to do this, but we want to do it in a way that we can implement it successfully, and we're just not in a position to do that right now.
What were the limitations, the way that you see it? What were those limitations in the data?
The data looked at a couple of 3 publicly available data points. I don't remember specifically what those were, but what we're looking at is the system as a whole. Some of the cases that both go onto the criminal side and to the juvenile justice side, that they bounce back and forth, and so they do have an impact, even though they're not reflected in the data that the Justice Center was looking at. And we gave some testimony this morning on that.
Can you also talk a little bit about I know you mentioned this morning it's a couple of years out here, but a new potential facility, I think 10 or 12 beds maybe was the number that was floated to be placed somewhere in Chittenden County, was it? Can you talk a little bit about that proposal?
Sure, we're looking at a permanent, secure facility for crisis stabilization for justice-involved youth, for those who need the highest amount of care, who might pose a danger to themselves or to others. That permanent, secure facility is probably a couple of years out still. We're in the RFP process right now, looking at a few different sites, and we'll have a decision on that in the coming months. And it is a 14-bed facility, I should say. I think it's 6 beds on the crisis stabilization side, and then 8 beds on the treatment side, so a longer-term stay and more treatment in a secure facility there. We think that's the right size for our needs as a state.
Actually, Commissioner, one more question. You kind of mentioned somewhat earlier, going back into even before the session, we heard about this Middlesex location, potentially January. We're now in February. I guess, when do you foresee that potentially coming online?
Yeah, the Middlesex facility is something that we refurbished as a temporary solution until we get to the permanent facility that I was just previously mentioning. The construction is done. It's ready. We simply have to contract with a service provider. We're in conversations with a service provider, but don't have anything signed on the dotted line yet, but we should have that in the next couple of weeks, I would expect. Thank you.
What are your thoughts on the renewable energy standard? Your thoughts on the renewable energy standard, House bill that would require utilities to source 100% of their power from renewable sources by 2030?
Again, I would probably refer to my commissioner. Is she on? She's not on. Maybe I can get Commissioner Tierney to. She's more in tune with that than I am. I would just big picture. I would say the quicker that we can get to renewables, the better. But we receive a lot from Canada now. I don't know the details of that, whether it's just in-state or not. I want to make sure that we're including out-of-state renewables as well. And I think there's going to be a lot coming online in the near future, whether it's offshore wind, maybe in the New England region, and in other areas as well. So again, I just don't want to make electricity any more expensive than it is today. We need to be sure that we're taking care of people and our businesses as well, trying to foster that manufacturing sector that relies on less expensive electricity, and they're paying a premium for it now. So if this can provide for less expensive energy, less expensive electricity, then I'd be all for it. But I haven't seen the details.
Governor, I have a couple budget questions. The state's attorney's office says 7 to 25 new deputies will be needed to address the criminal justice backlog. I've heard your administration wants to actually cut 9 deputy positions by vacancy. will reducing these deputies impact the state's criminal justice response?
Yeah, I'm not sure that that's entirely the case. We're not looking to cut. I think we're using some of their vacancies as well. And I think we have a discrepancy on the number of vacancies they have. So again, we'll look into the details and see what's, if we made a mistake, then we'll rectify that. But we think there's more vacancies than they're talking about.
Okay. Also, the legislature is talking about raising revenue, but we haven't heard an awful lot about reducing existing spending. Have you asked your agency or department heads to submit some across-the-board, actual year-over-year budget cuts, like, everyone cuts 2% or something like that?
I think in this environment, what we've asked a lot of our agencies and departments just to level fund, especially with the incredible inflation that we're seeing across the board and the higher costs of insurance and labor costs and so forth. So to produce a budget that doesn't raise taxes in this environment, I think they've done yeoman's work in providing that. So very proud of the effort on our part, but we'll see what happens as we move through. That's one of my concerns with the BAA. They're spending more than we had anticipated. In fact, there's a finite amount of money, so whatever they spend over and above what we had proposed will come out of the budget. So I look forward to understanding where they're going to get that money.
Thank you.
Governor, speaking of, big costs, we've talked about property taxes. One of the big underlying factors this year is healthcare costs. There's two big bills right now, the Medicaid expansion and also S211 dealing with the Green Mountain Care Board. Have you gotten a read on that bill, and what's your take?
I have not. I have not seen the bill. I haven't reflected on it myself.
What is your take of where we are in the reform project, bringing more people into the all-payer model,
Yeah, I think we need, I've always felt that we need to continue to focus on what we've been trying to accomplish over the last few years. And I know it's difficult to see it through, but this is something that's important to at least anticipate and not turning away from the path we're on at this point in time. So, as I mentioned in my budget address, the AHEAD model that the federal government is proposing, I think shows some promise. It's state-driven, using many of the ideas across the country, including Vermont. And so we'll continue to work with them and the Biden administration to make that better for us as well. But it's no doubt, healthcare is very costly, just like everything else, and has been increasing. So we need to get a handle on this, and I think the model that we proposed years ago, I think will prove itself out in time, but it's going to take a long time.
And just the last, how long do you think? That's been one of the big questions, is when will it show promise?
Well, we have a couple things working against this, our demographics being one. An older population tends to use more health care than a younger population. The younger population doesn't use it as much, but provides some of the payment to hold the whole thing together. And so we're, with our demographic shift, we have an older population, and we have fewer of our youth here, or fewer youth providing the basis for the revenue that we need for insurance. So we have both things working against us, but this is a prevention model. When you consider that, it takes almost a generation to get through that. We're trying to prevent people, trying to provide for better health and prevent some of those high-risk situations later in life. So that takes a while for it to come to fruition.
Back to property tax stuff real quick. Would it be accurate for me to say in a story that the governor says he supports mandatory growth caps on school budgets, and statutory limits on staff-to-student ratios in Vermont schools?
We have proposed some of those items, and we would propose them again. Because, again, due to our demographics, we have fewer kids in our schools, and there's been a shift. We have, over the last 20, 30 years, we have 30,000 fewer kids in our schools. So there's a day of reckoning, and we have to figure this out. So it would be a proposal we're pushing forward with, but again, we don't have the magic wand. I still believe in local control. I still believe in school boards having a say in this as well, and the people in communities and supervisory districts having a say. So we can provide some parameters and provide, I think, some direction, but at the end of the day, it all comes down to voters.
You said we proposed those in the past, and we would propose them again.
Well-
We would propose them if what?
Well, again, I've said we've made a number of proposals over the last 7, 8 years. They haven't been well received by the legislature, but we still think they have merit, and we'll propose them again if they're interested.
Got a few folks on the phones. We'll start with Tim McQuiston, Vermont Business Magazine.
Thanks, Jason. Governor, there's been a bill to change how the Vermont Care Board operates, and you just recently installed a new PUC chair, and I'm wondering if you see these regulatory boards changing in the future, whether you like it or not, and what you think will happen to them.
Well, I do think...
Or should happen to them.
Yeah, well, it's a good question. The Green Mountain Care Board was created due to single payer. When that didn't come about, we still had the Green Mountain Care Board. Before that, we had Bishka that oversaw some of the budgets, or oversaw all the budgets in the hospitals. So it's a question that should be debated, I think, as to whether we still have a need for the Green Mountain Care Board, and what changes should be made to make it even better if we keep the board. So I don't mind having the debate, and we'll see where we go from there.
How about on the public utilities commissioners? Do you see any changes now that there's a new chair?
I don't know if there'll be any changes. I mean, they're a quasi-judicial board that's supposed to be regulating and overseeing the energy sector. So I don't see that anything will change, but different personalities, and hopefully we'll have better results for Vermont ratepayers. I think that's the point. We need to protect ratepayers and make sure that we have a system that is conducive to more affordability and growth here in Vermont.
Do you see any one particular thing they could do to actually make that happen?
I wouldn't want to say at this point in time, but I think that there are areas where we would see that there would be a way to protect ratepayers in the future, and we'll see. I mean, this clean heat standard, it will be a test case for that.
All right, thank you very much, Governor.
Back to the room.
Governor, one of my readers suggested that since it seems like a lot of people are still working from home, a lot of state workers, what is the vacancy rate in these buildings that are all around us, and could any of it be perhaps transitioned to housing?
Fit up in many buildings would be very expensive to turn something into housing. We are constantly trying to find the sweet spot, so to speak, between remote work and in work provisions. And there's a bit of a shift both back and forth. I think that certainly during the pandemic, it was a lifesaver for us to continue with the government services with people working at home. Many people have continued in that respect, but some are coming back. So I think we have to reflect on this over the next couple of years to see where we go. But we are constantly looking for ways to make state government more efficient. And if it means that more people are working from home and we can free up space and maybe sell some of the space to someone who could make it into something else, whether it's affordable housing or housing in general or a business or whatever, we would be amenable to that.
Thank you.
One more time with property taxes. It feels like you're playing more of a passive role in this debate right now. Do you think that's a fair characterization?
Well, I think it's a realistic role. I mean, we've seen certainly over the last 2 years, they hold all the cards, the legislature does. They can do anything they want. They don't need me one way or the other. They've said that, and they've proven that. I've said we will play a role. We will be part of the solution. We're willing to work with you, but there has to be a desire for that. Otherwise, it's in their hands. I mean, they've proven that. So I don't know what else to say. We've tried the other approach. Over the last 7 or 8 years, we've brought things forward for them to consider, and they were just rejected out of hand. So we'll do whatever we can to help.
I understand they've been keeping you in the loop on what you're working in the Ways and Means right now. There are conversations ongoing between members of your administration and the legislature as it relates to that bill. To what extent does that represent the kind of collaboration that you're looking for to get to a point where you, I guess, feel comfortable putting an idea on the table and calling it an active proposal?
Well, we have put many proposals on the table over the years. They could still be considered, but we're willing to be creative and come up with others as well. And having a healthy dialogue, I think, is important. So a passive approach might be, we're here if you need us, and we're willing to help if that's passive, but we can't force them to do anything. We've tried that approach and it didn't work. So we're in the situation we're in. They have the supermajority, and they can do what they want.
Governor, do you have an update on the administration's search for a permanent Secretary of Education?
I am going through those as we speak. I interviewed one yesterday, so I have a couple more to go.
Were they good?
They're all good.
Any ETA on that?
Stay tuned. I mean, we know we want to make a decision as soon as we possibly can.
The House recently passed a bill which would prohibit discrimination based on hair types and styles. I'm wondering if you've read the bill and what you make of it.
Again, my focus has been on making Vermont more affordable and housing needs and so forth. And this bill is important. It sounds as though it's not controversial. We'll see. Again, we'll reflect on that, but when it gets to my desk, it's probably something I would sign.
What do you think about a 32-hour work week?
That would mean you'd have to work longer, though, Calvin. Is that what you're asking?
There's a bill introduced earlier this year establishing a 32-hour work week in Vermont. Just wonder if you'd seen it yet.
I haven't. I've heard some about that. I do think, some of the longer work days and less days, I think is something unique and has seemed to work for many people. And in fact, in corrections, we're using that strategy, and it's been effective, and they seem to appreciate that. Having 3 days off is important, but they work longer hours during the other 4 days. So we'll see. I think again that that employers need to look at different strategies to find qualified help and draw more people in, and have a chance for people to enjoy the outdoors and everything Vermont has to offer. So I think employers are looking at different approaches to attracting more people, and that could be one of them.
You okay, Calvin? That was a sick burn.
I'm good.
Back to some of the raise the age discussion in Senate Judd this morning, and Secretary Winters, if you want to jump back in, it was after you left the room that this came up. The committee seemed to be voicing some frustration over what they perceived as the administration asking to put off implementing raise the age year after year and saying over and over that they don't have the resources to implement it. And it almost sounded like they wanted to play a game of chicken and say, we're going to implement it this year and call your bluff, and if you need more money, then we'll pass more money in the budget. What do you make of that?
I wouldn't say that approach is any different than I've seen over the last few years. Thank you all.
You have to balance the burns out of the stairs and